Next, Honorable Gajendrakumar Ponnambalam. You have 17 minutes.
Can I take his 2 minutes? Honorable Presiding Member, I thank you for not cutting too much of my time from the 18 minutes, it's now 17. Firstly, I would like to state that this interim budget is being debated under trying circumstances is accepted even by us. That the government has to take tough decisions if this country is to somehow come out of this crisis is also something that we fully recognize. In that respect, the government managing to come to some sort of understanding, albeit conditional on certain performances that must happen from the government side with the IMF, is, I think, an important milestone. However, Honorable Presiding Member, if you look at the statement that was issued by the representatives of the IMF soon after the conclusion of the negotiations with the government, one of the things that they flag, which I think is extremely important, is the fact that to reduce the impact of the current crisis on the poor and the vulnerable, social spending must be raised, and by improving the coverage and targeting of social safety net programs. Now, what that clearly shows is that in these negotiations, one issue that has been of great concern, I presume both to the government also, as much as the IMF, is with regards to what is going to happen to the very vulnerable. Because of the reforms that must naturally occur if the country is to come out of the crisis, the worry is that if the vulnerable and the poor are not in some way buffeted or protected, then they will suffer far, far worse than what has already occurred. Now, in that respect, Honorable Presiding Member, I would like to focus on the Northeast because I don't think anyone in this House will contest the fact that the Northeast is probably one of the poorest and most vulnerable sections of the country, if not the most vulnerable area. The pauperization of the people of the Northeast did not start with this crisis. The pauperization of the people of the Northeast happened much earlier and has been that way for a considerable number of decades. And that, as a result, has been the reason why there is also an ethnic conflict that we speak of. So, under those circumstances, for the Northeast, people in the Northeast to be in some way protected, and if their economy is to grow, I ask you, Honorable Presiding Member, and I ask the members opposite, whether that can in fact happen when you have a strangulating presence, a suffocating presence, an oppressive presence, an occupational presence of the military. Where you have the military presence in the north to a ratio of 14:1. For every 14 civilians, you have a military personnel. Out of the 20-odd divisions of the Sri Lanka's army, you have 16 based in the northeast. I mean, can you just imagine the sort of occupational presence that creates? And I ask you, Honourable Presiding Member, with all honesty, I mean, this is a military that the people of the northeast accused of heinous crimes. They already feel extremely vulnerable because the people who they know committed those crimes already live amongst them. So quite apart from that oppression and quite apart from that severe trauma, you have now the economic crisis which has heaped trauma beyond speakable limits on them. And if not for the diaspora and their relatives abroad, those people would have died of starvation long time ago, long before even this crisis commenced. And now they have to put up with the crisis. So the question then, Honourable Presiding Member, is whether this government, and the onus is on the government more than even the IMF, whether this government has in any way, even under these most trying circumstances, recognized the vulnerability of the people of the Northeast. I mean, you have a situation where you have 90,000, at least 90,000 war widows in the Northeast. War widows. Can you imagine the impact that will have on the economy of the people of the Northeast? But very unfortunately, Honourable Presiding Member, from the statement that the IMF has issued, there does not seem to have been any discussion with regards to restructuring the military. Today, the military is so huge in its structure that in your last budget for defense you allocated something like 19% in total for military as well as non-military needs of the defense establishment. It almost came up to 19%. For education and health together, you didn't exceed 10%. This time, I think in the interim budget, you have increased for education and health slightly, minimal, but you have also increased military. Now I ask you, when the rupee has devalued to such limits, you are going to end up allocating even more at the next budget for defense. Otherwise, you can't sustain your military. You just can't sustain the hardware. So even in this crisis, when there is no war, when Sri Lanka does not have any enemies, if it has any enemies, it is people, members of this house, because it is they who have destroyed the country. It is they, through their decisions of the last several decades, have ensured that the people's economy has been destroyed. Nobody else did it. And yet you choose to maintain this most oppressive military, Honourable Presiding Member. I ask you again, how can the economy of a people expand under this suffocating occupational presence? It just can't. It just can't. So under those circumstances, it is our view that if we are to in some way cooperate with the government, then the government must start looking at restructuring to a point where it is fair on everybody. And most importantly, that it is fair on the most vulnerable and the poor. And if you don't do that, then the question is whether your policies are for the few and not for the many. Because that is certainly how it seems. And our view, Honourable Presiding Member, on that is that this budget, this interim budget fails. It fails miserably, and it fails because this government, particularly the President, needs the military. It does not have public support. On the contrary, the public want this government to go home. The public want another mandate. They want another election. And if you don't want to face the people, and if you don't want to respect democracy and the democratic wish of the people, then you need that military. You need to oppress the people. And it is through that oppression that you can sustain yourself. So, it is our view that this budget and the government's policies in general at no point will look at the concerns of the people of the Northeast, because for them, they require the military if they are to in some way survive politically. And if they are to survive politically, they need the military to stifle democracy in the South, because that is the only way they can sustain their rule. And in that sense, again, it is the Northeast that is going to be the target repeatedly. So that is the view that we have with regards to this interim budget. Most unfortunately, we expected a very strong leadership coming from the chief opposition party, in particular the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. I think he has been taking a principled stand on most things. But I must tell you, Honourable Presiding Member, I was astonished, I was shocked. I was shocked at a statement he made when he spoke on this interim budget, where he stated that he condemns the oppression using the military against the protesters. He condemns the arrests that have been taking place as being undemocratic. All of that he said. But the justification was something that is so shocking. What he said was that at this rate of the government using the military to oppress the protesters and arrest them, using the PTA and whatnot, the opposition will not be able to support the government in Geneva. Who is in Geneva? Who goes to Geneva every day? Who wants to raise the voice in Geneva? It is the Tamils. Because of the injustice that was committed, because of the genocide that was committed, because of the war crimes that was committed, it is we who go to Geneva. It is we who ask the international community, at least you put our issue on the agenda. And the leader of the opposition says that he might not be able to support the government in Geneva because the very same military is also oppressing the protesters today. That is the Sinhalese. So it is, if the Sinhalese are being oppressed, then of course we will have to stand in principle. But if only the Tamils are oppressed, then we will stay with you, we will back you, and we will support you in Geneva. I was astonished because I expected much, much more from the leader of the opposition. It almost sounds like he is a member of the government. That is the logic of the government. That can't be the logic of Mr. Sajith Premadasa, nor can it be the logic of a party that broke away from the president and claims that they are different in principle. But sadly, that is a slip that speaks the truth. And that is why I say the Tamil people cannot expect anything from this house. Not only this house, even if this house is dissolved and there is an election, unless the people decide on policy, unless the people decide that enough, when we talk of a system change, we mean a total change from the break of the racist policies that has been followed for the last 75 years. Unless the people take up that position, no one who gets elected to this house is going to make that change, Honorable Presiding Member. And it is for that reason that the only hope that we have is that at some point the people protesting will take up the Tamil issue. They haven't done it so far. Tokenism will not do. Tokenism will not do to bring this country together. It has to go far beyond. And if at this crisis we don't begin to transform genuinely and deeply, then we are not going to get out of this crisis. You are going to continue to spend many, many times more on defense.
Honourable Member, you have 2 more minutes.
You are going to spend many, many more times on defense. That is only going to increase. And that's a guzzler of money. It just burns money. It just burns money. It is not going to produce anything towards your economy. Why? Because you will keep making permanent enemies from within. From within. So it is that spirit of hope, not of the members of this house, but of the ordinary people who we hope will understand and open their eyes and see that the change must come right across, not only in the south. It must come for all of us. And if it comes for all of us, it means that you must recognize who the Tamils are. You must recognize who the Muslims are. You must recognize for all of us coming together to be the Sri Lanka that we would like to call our home. Thank you.